I remember the moment the prayers stopped working, though their power had been fading long before I dared admit it. Faith doesn't collapse in a single heartbeat. It decays slowly, corroded by exhaustion and doubt, eaten away by the grinding treads of endless war. It rots quietly, like rust beneath armor plating, until one morning you awaken in the stale dark of a battle tank and realize the words you've spoken every dawn are hollow syllables, stripped of meaning. By then, belief has already died, and what remains is habit, the mechanical repetition of ritual performed for a god who no longer answers. Our war machine had become both our home and our coffin, and the sovereign, if he still watched from his eternal throne, had turned his gaze elsewhere, indifferent to the 5 souls entombed in steel, praying to a silence vast as the void. They called her Iron Saint, a 70-ton relic of ceramite and adamantine, her hull scarred by decades of campaigns across worlds too ruined to name. The words were engraved on her glacis plate in sanctified script, half hidden beneath battle, honors and parchment sigils, purity seals fluttering like dead moths in the heat. But to us, she was simply the beast. For 18 months we lived within her armored gut on a manufacturing world that was already dying, killing in the sovereign's name until the difference between faith and murder blurred beyond recognition. Inside, she smelled of oil and sweat, of exhaust fumes that burned the throat and blood that never quite washed away. The air recyclers tasted of metal, the floors slick with condensation, the walls damp with something that felt alive. It was a place that devoured men's souls, one breath at a time. I was the gunner, had been for 7 years through 3 campaigns and too many cities reduced to ash. I knew every inch of that turret, every rattle, every squeal of metal under recoil, every quirk of the trigger mechanism that demanded just the right touch to fire true. My hands remembered what my conscience tried to forget. They moved without thought, guided by training, by repetition, by the reflexive obedience that the Corps instills in every soldier until killing becomes a motor function, an act as natural as breathing. Even now, locked in this cell where the priests say I must atone, I can still feel the weapon's firing stud beneath my finger. I can still see the flare of impact through the targeting scope, still hear the thunder of shells and the roar of crumbling walls. I confess this now. I felt satisfaction each time a target vanished in fire. They taught us to. They built that pleasure into us, rewarding it with medals, promotions, and the hollow praise of commanders who needed us to believe destruction was sacred work. Captain Raylan commanded us. 23 years in the armored divisions, a legend among tankers. His jaw had been replaced after a plasma burst took half his face on Barath Prime, leaving him with a Vox grill that gave every order the rasp of grinding metal. To new recruits, his voice sounded inhuman. To us, it was the voice of survival. We trusted him absolutely, not because faith demanded it, but because his instincts had kept us alive through every engagement where others burned. We obeyed without hesitation, without thought, because hesitation was death. Later, when everything collapsed, I would wonder whether that obedience had doomed us from the beginning, whether blind trust was the first fracture in the armor of our souls. But soldiers don't question, not if they want to live. Mikaro, the A. Driver was a giant of a man, all bulk and quiet strength, yet he handled the controls with the delicacy of a musician coaxing sound from an ancient instrument. He sang while he drove, low hymns in an archaic tongue that predated the sovereign's holy cant. He said his grandmother had taught him the verses, that they carried blessings older than any priest's sanction. His voice vibrated through the hull like the heartbeat of the tank itself. We believed those songs protected us. Faith is easy when victory feels inevitable, when the enemy dies far away and your prayers are answered by the echo of explosions. Faith is easy when it costs nothing. Petter, our loader, was the oldest. 16 years in service, forearms tattooed with scripture so faded it looked like scars. He said each mark told a story, each campaign, each kill. His hands were steady as he lifted the shells, 40 kilos apiece, sliding them into the breach with reverent precision. He kissed everyone before loading it, lips moving in silent prayer as if the shell itself could carry absolution through the barrel. Watching him comforted us. The ritual made the killing feel sanctified. It let us pretend we were doing holy work rather than reducing human beings to ash. We all needed those little lies to survive. Then there was Davos, barely 19, pale and wide-eyed, his uniform still stiff with the smell of factory starch. He manned the forward guns, crouched beneath layers of armor that pressed in on every side. In those first weeks, he flinched at every impact. When we crushed bodies beneath the treads, he gagged into a bucket, but youth learns quickly in war. By the second month, his hands no longer trembled. By the third, his prayers were mumbled, half-hearted. By the fourth, his laughter during battle sounded wrong, too sharp, too bright. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself a lot of things. We had deployed to Vaskara 9, a forge world choking on its own exhaust fumes. The briefings had called it a simple pacification. Rebellious laborers, unarmed zealots, nothing our regiment's 300 tanks couldn't crush within a season. The officers spoke with perfect confidence, pointing to maps full of glowing objectives and optimistic casualty estimates. They promised swift victory, minimal losses, divine favor. We nodded, because that's what soldiers do when the command structure speaks in the sovereign's name. Doubt was treason. Thought was dangerous. But Vaskara was already dead. The skies bled yellow haze, the air so thick with industrial ash that the sun was a rumor. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the manufactorums, titanic foundries belching, smoke into a sky that hadn't known daylight for generations. Rivers of toxic runoff cut through the Hab districts like glowing veins. The people, those we were sent to liberate, looked like shadows made of grease and hunger. The enemy didn't resemble heretics. They looked like workers who had forgotten how to hope. Our first battles went well, or so we were told. Targets neutralized, objectives secured, hundreds dead, thousands pacified. But the resistance hardened instead of breaking. They struck from tunnels and ruined manufactories, using weapons they shouldn't have possessed. Real weapons, precision-made, guided by intelligence we'd been told they lacked. Every kilometer of advance cost us blood and armor. In a month, 80 tanks were gone. The command blamed the terrain. The chaplains blamed our faith. I think now the world itself wanted us to fail. Inside the beast, the air grew heavier. The machine's spirit, whatever that was, became temperamental. Controls stuck, targeting servos misaligned. The Vox filled with whispers that no engineer could explain. We performed the rites, cleansing oils, engraved prayers, litanies of ignition. But the tank groaned beneath us, as if protesting the slaughter. Sometimes the auspex flickered without reason, the sensors showing movement where nothing lived. Sometimes the air inside shimmered like heat distortion, and I'd swear I saw faces forming in the metal walls, faces of those we'd killed flickering and gone. That was when I first heard it, a voice beneath the static. Not the priest's drone, not the orders of command, but something deeper, soft, intimate, like thought whispered directly into my skull. It spoke no known tongue, yet I understood it. It told me the sovereign's light was a lie, that our empire was not salvation but machinery, built from human suffering and fed by our obedience. It said faith was just another gear in that endless engine, spinning until it stripped itself bare. I told myself it was interference, fatigue, madness, but the words stayed, curling through my dreams. The others felt it too, though we didn't speak of it then. You could see it in their eyes during maintenance checks, in the stillness after combat when the tank's cooling systems hissed like breath. Mikaro's hymns grew uncertain. Petar stopped kissing the shells. Ralan's orders came slower, his mechanical voice cracking on the syllables. And Davos, sweet, terrified Davos, began to laugh at the killing. The war dragged on, each sunrise indistinguishable from the last. The briefings blurred together, voices of officers and chaplains dissolving into static over the Vox. They spoke of progress, of righteous victory, of the sovereign's enduring favor. But we saw none of it. Every engagement bled us thinner. Every day the beast crawled deeper into a landscape of ruins and fire, and every night the prayers we mumbled before sealing the hatches grew shorter, quieter, more perfunctory. Faith was losing ground. We could all feel it, not in a single moment of revelation, but in the way silence filled the spaces where conviction used to live. The machine itself seemed to know. The ignition rites grew longer, the response time slower, the engine's roar more uneven. The machine spirits, those invisible guardians we'd been told dwelt within every bolt and piston, no longer stirred to our litanies. Maikaro began using extra incense before startup, thickening the cabin with smoke until we coughed and our eyes burned. Petar carved verses into the ammunition casings, desperate to draw attention from some divine power that no longer answered. And I began to hear the voice again, clearer now, threading itself between my thoughts. It spoke not in command, but in revelation, its tone almost tender. "You already know, don't you?" it whispered. "You've seen the truth behind the prayer. You just don't want to name it." I told myself I was imagining it. Sleep deprivation, radiation sickness, anything but what it was. But then Roland began to falter. During engagements, he hesitated before issuing orders, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. His rasping vox would go silent mid-sentence, replaced by long pauses that made our hearts stutter in sync with the beast's engine. Once, during a night assault, he froze completely. The enemy had breached the perimeter, dozens of them charging through the smog, rifles flashing. We waited for his command. It never came. Maikaro kept driving, instinct taking over, while Petar loaded shells and I fired blindly into the dark. When the smoke cleared, our section was alive only because muscle memory had replaced leadership. Afterward, Raylan muttered through his vox, voice trembling with static. "The Emperor didn't guide us. We just got lucky." None of us corrected him. By the third month, luck had become our only religion. We buried comrades when we could, though most burned with their machines. Entire platoons disappeared in collapsed sectors. Communications faltered. Command still insisted victory was near, that reinforcements were en route, that faith would sustain us. But the maps we saw no longer matched the terrain we fought on, and the names of our fallen were never mentioned in the after-action reports. It was as if the Imperium, or the Sovereign's Army as they called it here, had already written us off. The voice returned to me often during the sleepless cycles. It no longer whispered but conversed, questioning instead of commanding. "Why do you fight, little gunner?" it asked one night while I cleaned the cannon's breech. "Is it duty, habit, or fear of what waits when the engine stops?" I didn't answer. It didn't need me to. "You already suspect," it said. "The Sovereign doesn't hear you. He never did. The machine you serve feeds only itself. You are fuel, holy only in the way fire is holy. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to shout prayers until my throat bled. But instead I just kept cleaning. The truth had a way of settling in quietly, like dust on the instruments, so subtle you barely noticed it until it coated everything. Davos changed first. He had always been too young for this, too untouched by cynicism. One day he simply stopped pretending. After a skirmish that left the enemy line in ruins, he laughed, an awful high-pitched sound that cut through the comms. "They ran," he said. "They actually thought hiding mattered." His tone wasn't pride. It was delight. From then on he laughed every time the cannon fired. Every time the flamer burned. Every time a shell found its mark. Raylan warned him once, tried to invoke the discipline manual, but his voice faltered halfway through. The reprimand died. We all let it go, because reprimanding him meant confronting our own decay, and none of us were strong enough for that. The rot spread unseen. Mikaro's hymns faded into silence, replaced by muttered curses when the controls jammed. Petar stopped carving prayers and began etching tally marks instead, one for every shell fired, every target destroyed. I asked him once what number he was on. 8,000 and something, he said without looking up. The Emperor's probably lost count. He grinned, but his eyes were hollow. It was during the 4th month that my faith finally shattered. We had cornered a cluster of insurgents in a collapsed district, civilians mixed with fighters. Command ordered an artillery purge, but our position was closer, so the task fell to us. Through the sight I saw them, people trying to dig through rubble, carrying children bloodied but alive. The targeting rune blinked red. "Fire," Raylan said, monotone through the vox. "They're enemy assets." I hesitated for a heartbeat. That was all. Then I pressed the firing stud, and the beast's roar drowned the world. When the dust cleared, there was only silence where they had stood. For the first time I felt nothing. No righteousness, no triumph, not even guilt. Just emptiness, wide and cold, And in that silence the voice whispered, "Now you understand." After that day, prayers became mockery. We still spoke them, but not to honor the sovereign, only to fill the noise. Peter joked that the litanies were good luck charms. Mikaro said the emperor probably liked the sound of begging. Even Raylan stopped insisting on the rituals. He still led morning observance, but the words came out distorted, mechanical, the tone of a man repeating lies he no longer believed. Davos didn't even pretend anymore. He carved obscenities into the hull, messages no one else could see for gods we dared not name. The beast decayed with us. The treads screamed like tortured metal. The armor flaked in places where no weapon had touched it, and an oily sweat gathered along the seams, dripping onto the floor in black rivulets. The smell turned sour, thick with something almost organic. When the lights flickered, we saw shapes in the corners, reflections of faces we recognized but couldn't name. The machine spirits, the priests would have called them, were restless. But I no longer believed in machine spirits. I believed only in entropy. Our comms began to fail soon after. Static filled every channel, but beneath it the whispers grew louder. Sometimes they sounded like the voices of our dead comrades. Sometimes like our own thoughts played backward. Other times, like something ancient and vast laughing through the circuits. None of us admitted hearing it at first. But one night, as we sat in the stillness of the forward trench, Mikaro said quietly, "They're talking to us, you know." No one asked who they were. Petar only nodded. Raylan stared into the darkness through his command sight for a long time before replying, "Then maybe it's time we started listening." The war consumed seasons without distinction. There were no true days or nights anymore, only cycles of killing and repair, of smoke that never cleared and skies that glowed red with the reflection of burning cities. I lost count of how many weeks we'd fought, how many times we'd slept in our armor, our skin imprinted by the steel that surrounded us. The officers' voices came rarely now, filtered through damaged Vox channels. When they did, they spoke in abstractions, objectives, containment, acceptable losses. Their words had the sterile tone of men who no longer remembered what a face looked like. We were machines pretending to be soldiers, performing rituals that no longer had meaning. Even our victories tasted like ash. One night, while the beast idled in the ruins of a refinery district, Raylan called for us to gather. The glow from the smog outside painted his faceplate in ghostly orange. "It means nothing," he said, his vox crackling with static, but the despair in his voice came through clearly. Mikaro looked up from the driver's console, eyes sunken, and asked what he meant. "All of it," Raylan rasped. "The prayers, the killing, the sovereign's glory. We've been murdering workers, not heretics. There's no divine hand guiding us, just orders from corpses who call themselves gods." The words fell heavy in the cramped space. None of us argued. We couldn't. Each syllable rang true in the hollow places we'd tried to ignore. It broke something inside us. Petar was the first to speak after a long silence. He said he had kept count. Over 8,000 shells loaded, each one blessed, each one killing without discrimination. He said he realized that the blessings didn't change a thing, that steel and explosives didn't know holiness from heresy. He laughed while he spoke, the sound raw and cracked, then began to weep, pressing his grease-stained hands against his eyes like a man trying to blind himself to his own memories. Mikaro confessed next. He admitted that for weeks he hadn't followed command's coordinates, that he'd been driving us in circles through the same ruined sectors. "I thought maybe we'd die somewhere quiet," he said softly, "before they made us kill again." His voice broke on the last word. "I think that was when I began to realize none of us would survive this, even if we somehow lived." Davos just stared. His eyes had that distant, feverish light that comes when a mind has gone somewhere far past reason. "You're all too late," he murmured and smiled. I stopped believing months ago. The laughter keeps me sane. He reached up and tapped the side of his helmet like it was a drumbeat, whispering to someone only he could hear. We avoided looking at him after that. Madness was contagious, and we all feared how close we stood to catching it. I told them then about the whispers, about the voice that spoke when I was alone, the one that told me we were nothing but cogs in an engine that fed on our faith. So I told them it was right, that maybe heresy was just the name for clarity. The words came out before I could stop them, and when I did, I waited for Raylan to threaten me with execution, or for the commissar to burst through the hatch and drag me outside for summary judgment. But no one condemned me. Ralan simply nodded. Then at least we're not mad alone. We sat there in that silence that follows confession, each of us exposed, stripped bare of belief. The prayers we'd once chanted to banish fear now echoed in our heads like mockery. The tank hummed beneath us, its engine idling with the slow rhythm of a creature waiting for its master's next command. And beneath that hum we heard something else, a low resonant murmur that came not from the engine, but from the metal itself. Words without sound, promises without mercy. Later, when the city slept beneath its perpetual storm, we saw him, a figure in the ruins beyond our position. His robes might once have been white, though they were now the color of smoke and old blood. He stood perfectly still in the burning wind, and for reasons I cannot explain, none of us raised a weapon. "Do you see it?" Petter whispered. "He's been watching." The figure lifted one arm, slow and deliberate, beckoning us forward. No Vox transmission, no movement from nearby units. Just that silent gesture, patient as inevitability. Ralan opened the hatch without hesitation. The locks clicked open like the unsealing of a tomb. Air rushed in, cold chemical sharp with the tang of ozone. I followed him out. The others came after, drawn by something older than orders, stronger than fear. The figure waited among the wreckage, its face hidden beneath a hood that never moved in the wind. When it finally spoke, the sound filled the space between thought and breath. "You have seen the truth," it said. "You have looked upon the machine and recognized it for what it is. The Sovereign's faith was built to cage you. But there are other powers, honest ones. They demand blood, not worship. They reward truth, not obedience." The words slithered into my mind like oil. It didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like inevitability. I looked at my crew and saw resignation, not terror. We had no faith left to lose. Ralan spoke for all of us when he said, "Then what must we do?" The figure extended its hand, revealing small brass icons, 5 of them, each inscribed with sigils that twisted when seen directly. When mine touched my palm, the metal burned cold, sinking into my flesh until it was part of me. I gasped, but the pain carried something else beneath it. Relief. For the first time in months I felt purpose again, even if that purpose was damnation. The figure told us the truth none of us wanted to hear, that across the front, others had fallen as we had fallen, that crews, soldiers, entire regiments had begun to doubt. That faith was cracking everywhere, spreading like disease. We would be the signal. Our defiance would ignite the rest. No promises of salvation, no lies of redemption, only the certainty of war without illusion. Only the freedom of admitting what we had always been, killers who finally stopped pretending. We returned to the beast and sealed ourselves inside. The air smelled different, cleaner somehow, charged with copper and electricity. The black oil on the walls had hardened into a sheen that reflected red in the dim light. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were instructions, not shouted or ordered, but offered as if we'd always known what to do. We didn't sleep. We sat in the half-dark and felt the transformation begin, not of flesh but of spirit. The icons on our chests pulsed in unison with our hearts. We were bound again, no longer by faith but by truth. When dawn came, grey and poisonous, the commissar came to inspect us. He found us waiting. Ralan greeted him with all the proper gestures, his metallic voice steady and calm. The man relaxed, thinking all was well. Davos shot him through the chest before he could finish his prayer. Ralan put another round through his skull for certainty. The body slid down the hull, leaving a streak of red across the iron script of Iron Saint. I remember thinking how the blood almost looked like paint, like some new blessing. Raw and honest, we turned the turret toward the next nearest tank. The gun fired once, fire blossomed, metal screamed. Faithful men died before they could even ask why. The first shot began the rebellion. The next turned it into doctrine. The first shot tore through the morning haze like the scream of a god being strangled. The shell's impact lit the horizon in a column of flame, the shockwave slamming into our hull, rattling every bolt and bone. The nearest tank, faithful brothers we'd fought beside for months, ceased to exist in a burst of molten armor and vaporized flesh. For a heartbeat, there was silence across the Vox, as if the entire regiment struggled to comprehend the impossible. Then came the confusion, the calls for verification, the shouts of disbelief. But by then, the beast was already turning its turret toward the next target, the cannon's barrel glowing red from the first shot, hungry for another. Raylan's voice was calm when he spoke through the internal channel. No turning back. His words carried the quiet certainty of a prayer that had finally found its God. Peter loaded the next shell without hesitation, his movements fluid, ritualistic. But this time the prayer on his lips was not to the Sovereign. It was something older, rougher, made of hunger and defiance. Mikaro pushed the engine to full throttle, the beast roaring as if alive, metal vibrating like muscle beneath the surge of power. We moved through the camp like executioners, not soldiers. The faithful never stood a chance. The first salvo shattered the command vehicle. The second took out the Vox relay. The third turned a squadron of transports into twisted, burning sculptures. Men ran screaming, weapons forgotten, prayers falling from their mouths unanswered. The smell of burning fuel and flesh mingled in the air, a scent we all knew too well, but now it no longer repulsed us. It exhilarated us. The brass icons against our chests throbbed in unison, their cold pulse spreading through our veins. The whispers in my mind had become a chorus, every word clear, resonant, undeniable. Now you see clearly. Now you act without chains. It didn't take long for others to join us. Across the battalion line, other tanks began to turn their guns inward, some out of confusion, some because they too had heard the whispers, some simply because madness had been waiting for permission to wear a uniform. Within an hour, the encampment had become a slaughter. Faithful and faithless, loyalists and heretics, all indistinguishable in the firestorm that consumed them. The Vox was nothing but static and screams. Through it all, Rowland's voice remained steady, delivering coordinates like a conductor leading an orchestra of betrayal. Left flank 2 degrees, fire. Advance 50 meters. Purge them all. When it was over, 13 tanks remained. 13 machines and their crews. Men and women who had cast away everything that once made them human. The smoke rose in black towers that blotted out what little sunlight ever pierced this world's atmosphere. We formed a loose line amid the wreckage, the air vibrating with residual heat. The beast's hull was slick with blood and oil, streaked with soot, painted by the carnage we had unleashed. Through the cracked periscope, I watched the other tanks turn their turrets in silent acknowledgement, our shared defiance binding us tighter than any oath we had ever sworn. The transformation was not instant. It came in whispers and heat and the subtle rearranging of the metal around us. The beast began to grow. Her armor shifted like the plates of a living creature, edges sharpening, ridges forming where none had been. The holy symbols painted across her hull blistered and peeled away, replaced by shapes that shimmered faintly, symbols that twisted when stared at too long. Inside, the air became thick and sweet, charged with copper and ozone. The machine spirit was gone, or perhaps it had merely shed its disguise. What remained was something vast and hungry and aware. When we breathed, the tank breathed with us. When our hearts beat, so did hers. That night, we gathered around the wreck of the Commissar's body, or what was left of it, and Raylan spoke. "We've been killing for ghosts," he said. "The Sovereign, the priests, the Empire, all of it built on lies to make slaughter feel holy." He paused, his vox crackling with distortion. "Now we kill for truth, for ourselves, for the gods who do not lie about what we are." We did not cheer. There was nothing triumphant about what we had become. Only acceptance. Only the grim peace of understanding that there was no redemption waiting. Only continuation. The days that followed blurred into blood and smoke. We hunted the survivors, those who still clung to their faith like drowning men clutching a corpse. They sent armored columns against us, faithful units, banners flying, hymns blaring through loudspeakers. But they fought with conviction, and conviction made them predictable. We knew every maneuver, every standard tactic, every prayer before it was spoken. We tore through them with surgical precision. Each kill fed the beast. Her armor pulsed with heat, glowing faintly in the dark like embers under ash. The voices whispered instructions between the detonations. Strike fast. Strike without mercy. Burn away their illusions. I remember one battle clearly. A column of 20 tanks had cornered us in a valley of rusted manufacturum husks. They surrounded us, reciting the litany of purity through their vox amplifiers, as if the words could ward off what we had become. Rowland gave the order to hold fire. For a moment we sat in silence, engines idling. The enemy's hymns echoed across the canyon, filling the air with desperate faith. Then Rowland said, "Let them pray," and triggered the flamer array. The valley became an inferno. The metal walls turned orange, then white. The screams lasted minutes, maybe less. When the fire died, There was only slag and silence. Peta whispered, "No prayers left now." We didn't realize it at first, but the beast was changing more rapidly. Her internal panels pulsed like veins under skin. The black oil on the floor rose in thin, rippling lines, forming symbols that matched those on the brass icons embedded in our flesh. Mikaro said he could hear her heartbeat through the controls. He was right. I could feel it too, a low thrum that synced with my pulse until I no longer knew which one was mine. She was becoming something more than machine, and we were becoming something less than men. It didn't frighten me anymore, it felt inevitable. 8 months passed in that state, raiding, burning, killing anything that bore the sovereign's sigil. They called us traitors, heretics, monsters. They sent fleets after us, dropships and artillery, but we always slipped through, guided by whispers that knew the enemy's every move. Some of the faithful broke when they saw us. Some dropped their weapons and prayed to us instead, mistaking our corruption for divine revelation. We didn't correct them. Let them worship the truth for once. The beast's interior became a shrine. Blood was our incense. Screams were our hymns. We carved names of the dead into the walls until there was no space left, then carved into our armor instead. The icons had long since fused with our skin, glowing faintly beneath it. Sometimes when we slept, I could feel them pulse in time with the tank's reactor, a rhythm that whispered of eternity and fire. The line between man and machine blurred completely. We were extensions of her will, and her will was the will of the powers that fed on faith's ashes. And yet in the rare moments between battles, I would think of what we had been. I would remember the first time I fired the cannon, the pride I'd felt, the lie that killing in the sovereign's name was holy. I would remember the prayers that used to make me feel clean, the songs Mikaro used to sing, the way Davos laughed before madness claimed him. The memories didn't bring guilt anymore, just a dull ache like the ghost of an amputated limb. Faith was gone, and even regret had burned away. Only clarity remained when the Imperium, or whatever was left of it on this dying world, finally cornered us. We didn't run. They came with 3 full companies, artillery lines, orbital support. They promised our annihilation in the Sovereign's name. We welcomed them. We wanted to see how much their god's protection was worth. They came for us at dawn, though on Vaskara dawn was only a dim shifting of the sky's toxic hue, a transition from black to bruised grey. We heard them before we saw them, the rumble of treads, the thunder of orbital artillery shaking the ground beneath us. The Imperium had finally woken to our existence, and it sent its answer in fire. 3 armored companies surrounded us, flanked by waves of infantry. Their banners gleaming in the haze, their hymns broadcast through amplifiers loud enough to drown out the screams of engines. It was almost beautiful, that faith. So absolute, so doomed. The beast growled beneath us, her internal systems humming like a creature eager to feed. Raylan's voice came through the vox, steady as ever. "Let them come," he said. "Let them pray." The first salvo hit a kilometer away, then another half that distance, then closer still. The ground erupted around us, soil and metal shrapnel cascading against the hull. The beast shuddered but held. Inside it was hot enough to sear the skin, every vent exhaling the breath of hell. Mikaro grinned behind the sweat streaking his face. "Feels like home," he muttered, and drove us forward through the inferno. The world outside blurred into fire and smoke. Through my gun sight, I saw their tanks advancing in perfect formation, banners raised, cannons aligned, faith made into geometry. I whispered a single word before firing, "Faithless." The shell flew true. The first Loyalist tank exploded in a tower of orange flame, fragments spinning skyward like dying prayers. They answered in kind. The next barrage slammed into our flank, tearing through armor, filling the cabin with acrid smoke and sparks. Feotar screamed something wordless, blood pouring from his nose as a shrapnel shard pierced his throat. He didn't stop loading. His hands, half severed by the blast, kept moving, feeding the gun as though driven by something greater than flesh. Raylan bellowed orders that were drowned by static. The beast was singing now, her voice a low metallic wail that vibrated in our bones. The icons in our flesh burned ice cold, their pulse matching the rhythm of her engine. I felt her anger, her hunger, her joy in the slaughter. We were no longer crew and machine. We were one organism, bleeding and killing as a single entity. The battle lasted for hours, though time meant nothing. We killed until the gun barrel glowed white, until the treads melted into the scorched earth, until the air itself became thick with ash. One by one, the other heretic tanks fell, consumed by concentrated fire, their hulls cracking open like eggs to reveal the corpses or creatures that had once been human. I saw Davos die through the viewport, his tank surrounded by loyalists, his laughter echoing through the comms until static replaced it. Peter finally slumped forward mid-reload, the life gone from his eyes, though his hands still twitched with the reflex of devotion. Mikaro's chest was a ruin of blood and metal shrapnel, but his hands never left the controls. Even when his breathing stopped, only Ralan and I remained, and the beast, though even she was dying. Warning lights flashed across every panel, but we ignored them. We had already crossed beyond consequence. I could hear the loyalists chanting outside as they closed in. "The Sovereign protects. The Sovereign purifies." Their words were desperate now, ragged with fear. The tank's interior filled with a strange, luminous mist that seemed to pour from the cracks in her armor. The whispers returned, louder than ever, layered upon each other until they became a roar of 1,000 unseen voices. "Do you understand now?" they asked. "Do you see what faith becomes when the truth is too heavy to bear?" Ralan turned toward me. His face was half burned, his vox grill sparking, but his eyes still held that same iron steadiness. "It's over," he said. "We've burned everything worth saving." He reached out, placing his bloodied hand on the console. "She's yours now." Before I could speak, he pulled the sidearm from his belt and pressed it to the underside of his jaw. The shot was deafening in the confined space. His body slumped against the control panel, and the beast's hum faltered for a heartbeat, as though mourning him before rising again. I was alone. Alone inside a dying god of steel, surrounded by fire and faith and the ghosts of my crew. The loyalists were closing in, their spotlights piercing the smoke. I could hear their loudspeakers blaring condemnations, their preachers calling me abomination, apostate, damned. They were right on all counts. I looked down at my hands, slick with blood that was not all my own, and wondered when they had stopped looking human. The metal was seeping through my skin now, veins turning to filaments, bone hardening into alloy. The beast and I were merging completely. I understood then what the whispers had promised. Not power, not salvation, but permanence. Faith dies, flesh decays, steel remembers. When the final barrage came, I didn't resist. The shells struck true, detonating in a chain that tore the beast apart from within. I felt every rupture, every crack, as though it were my own flesh splitting open. The last thing I saw before the light consumed everything was the interior walls blooming like molten glass, the sigils burning brighter than ever, their light crawling across the metal like veins of living fire. Then came silence, not peace, just absence. I awoke days later, or maybe weeks. I was no longer inside the beast. I was in a cell, and stone walls, iron restraints, the air thick with incense meant to drown the stench of blood. The interrogators had found me in the wreckage. They said I was the only survivor. They said I would live long enough to confess, to name the others, to give them something holy to write in their ledgers, before they executed me. I laughed when they said the word holy. They didn't like that. They beat me until my teeth broke, but it didn't matter. You can't beat truth out of a man who's already seen it naked. They call me heretic now. They call me traitor. They will march me to the square tomorrow, parade me before the faithful as a warning. I will not resist. What would be the point? The Sovereign's mercy is just another lie, and death is only the end of one machine and the beginning of another. Before they come for me, I write this. I want it remembered. What happens when belief dies, when obedience curdles into understanding? They will destroy these words, of course, or bury them in the archives, sealed away so no one else can read the truth. But maybe someone will, maybe a soldier, years from now, sitting in another steel coffin, will find this and recognize himself in it. They will come soon. I can already hear the boots in the corridor, the clatter of weapons, the priests muttering prayers they don't believe. They will take me to the scaffold, recite their charges, proclaim that I lost faith. They will be right. I did lose it. I threw it away like the shrapnel of a useless shell. But in its place I found something more enduring. Honesty. The kind the Imperium calls damnation. The door opens. Light floods in. They call my name. The one I had before numbers replaced it, before faith stripped it of meaning. I stand, chains rattling, and walk toward that light. I feel no fear. The beast is gone, but I can still hear her engine somewhere deep inside me, a faint thrum beneath the silence. I think it's waiting. Maybe death is just another ignition. If anyone ever reads this, understand, faith fails, and when it does, there is no salvation waiting. Only the truth, and raw, merciless, and clean. The sovereign does not protect. He never did. And yet we killed for him anyway, convinced that murder was mercy and obedience was grace. That is what it means to serve without question. That is what it means to doubt and keep killing anyway. That is what follows when a battle tank crew